You mentioned how the suicide hotlines are pretty much instructed to call the police departments after they assess the imminent risk. However, the people who are calling these lifelines are being told that they're confidential and that it's not disclosed to the callers that the tracing is possible, that police can show up at their doorstep, after they go down their like little tree of, that question answer type of decision making tree. This is to me an affront of all things that I've been trying to fight for when it comes to civil rights. I mean, how could a person feel? A lot of times, I know people with suicide, you know, ideation. They could be talked out. And I don't mean talked out of it. I am not trying to like minimize this because it's a serious situation. Nobody wants to see their loved ones do that. And I've had people in my family who committed suicide. So nobody wants that. Now that's like the worst thing, right? But, in their response to the criticism, they say, well, we help people more than we hurt them. And you write that in your book. It's such a terrible point of view that comes across when they are trying to err on the side of caution and they take so many more people down with them because the trauma that people live with after these experiences last for decades. So it's not as though you could just say, oh, it's just like one little experience, you'll get over it, whatever. We didn't hurt you. You're okay. No, once you're on these drugs, you can't get off them easily. So your life changes, okay? And all the side effects that go with it change. And everything else that you lay out so beautifully in your book, you're now at the hands of quite possibly this, entering again and again these institutions and just having a difficult time rebuilding after you've been told that you're a mental patient. How can people trust these services that we're told to call upon in moments of distress?
Exactly. I mean, when you phrase it like that, I am thrown back upon a question I have all the time is I'm like, how can any self-respecting, serious mental health professional support coercion and force? Because it only works once. Like once you learn what that experience is about, if you've actually been first forced, and I want to say that, of course I have talked with, and there are people out there who have what I call a nominally involuntary experience, which is you could be brought in, and treated respectfully, talked with, say, hey, we're really sorry, we're worried about you, so we really want to keep you here. Sorry about that. Let's talk. Have you ever tried these drugs before? Would you like to try them? And then you can let us know how you're feeling. We'll try something out. You know what I mean? And people can have this experience and maybe they find something that works for them or whatever. And it's all basically voluntary. And so I call that nominally involuntary. My book is about the people who say, no, I've tried that drug before, or hey, you're scaring me right now, or
Right.
you know what? I don't like this place. I want to go home. And then all these gears kick in where you see how
Yes.
aggressive the system can be and how abusive it can be.
Yes.
It's this betrayal that people experience. So yeah, a lot of these lines, some of them do disclose, and I say, great, right? If you disclose, look, if you say this or that, we are going to trace your call, even if we don't know, even if you don't tell us where you are. We have the capacity to do this, and police are going to show up and take you to a psychiatric hospital. So you decide for yourself whether you want to disclose that.
Right.
Then I think, okay, we're somewhat okay there, right?
Yeah.
What I'm really concerned about is where that's not being disclosed at all, or it's hidden somewhere deep down in a privacy policy that no one ever reads. So person calls one of these lines, or indeed the same thing can happen when you just reach out for help with a therapist or something else where you don't know that this is part of the way the system works. There are certain things you
Right.
can say, and it might be suicidal feelings, or it could be some sort of violent feelings you could be having. And let's face it, most people in distress are going to have one or the other, if not both,
Right.
to some degree. If
Right.
you're in serious distress, yeah. So it just becomes then a bit of a subjective thing on the part of the person answering the phone at the 988 line or the other hotline or the therapist as to what they really think the risk level is and whether they personally want to assume any of that sort of risk level betrayal or possible liability, even though it's very questionable what level of liability professionals really have in this environment, or volunteers for that matter.
Right.
So, but anyway, so as a result, there's this profound sense of betrayal that that person experiences. They had no idea this could happen. And then that betrayal compounds as they get shuttled through this very traumatizing experience that usually involves police, ambulance, restraints, forced drugging, threats, intimidation, locked up detention in a psychiatric hospital for some period of time that you don't know how long it's going to be before you even get a hearing,
Right.
and then a questionable hearing, all of this stuff that some of which we've already talked about. So it's brutal, yeah. And I don't know how they justify it, really, because we have no evidence in the science that this is on the whole helping these people.
Right.
If anything, it seems to make people more suicidal. That's the best evidence we got. It's questionable evidence, but it's the best we have. Suggests it looks like when you do this to somebody, you're actually going to make them far more suicidal, like 10 times, 100 times more suicidal.
Right.
Those are what the numbers suggest. And then even if they were not suicidal, they sometimes become suicidal. And then for all these other people where suicide wasn't the issue, we also have no evidence that it actually helps. Not scientific evidence. Everybody's got a story. Oh, it helped this person, or it didn't help that person. But in aggregate, there's been very few studies. It's not even studied. And the reason I think it's not even studied is because anyone with any common sense who looks at it goes, how is this really going to help people, right? It's more like an immediate emergency control measure that has long-term damages. And we need to, as a society, as I think Sarah David Alf on Wildflower Alliance says very articulately in my book, we essentially need to really think about this as a society. Like, are we willing maybe to just assume some level of risk out there, and that we may lose some people along the way, but conversely, everybody can then feel safe talking about what's really happening for them, rather than what we have now, which is more and more people actually become very, very justifiably afraid of disclosing what's happening for themselves and reaching out for help, which is what's happening now. People are being driven away from the mental health system, and the mental health system becomes consequently even more aggressive in trying to rope them in.